Welcome to another episode of Creating Cultures that Outperform. I hope you've been enjoying our series on how these human factors affect the productivity of the modern workplace. I'm Frank Wander. I'm the founder and CEO of People Productive, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Terry Mays, a certified culture engineer. So today we have another really good show, and it's all about how workplace conflict affects productivity and what you can do about it. And it's really interesting when you look at workplace conflict, they've done a number of studies on this. One study showed that 24% of the people in the survey had experienced a conflict of one kind or another that affected their levels of productivity and their ability to get their work done. And this is a very important topic because it's real. And we're in an era of remote work where relationships are not as strong as they used to be when people worked, side by side in an office. So if you missed it, you should look at our episode on the power of relationships and how they really build better teamwork and collaboration. Because if you want to avoid workplace conflict, you should be focusing on relationships, and then hopefully people can resolve things on their own. But we know that isn't always the case. Workplace conflict's real. It gets in the way. It affects people's performance, clouds their judgment, makes them nervous and anxious, makes them not want to meet with certain people. Makes them preoccupied in a meeting. So they're thinking about the person or the threat, not necessarily the content of the meeting. So it can be very, very debilitating. And Terry is actually an expert on conflict and what to do about it and has given talks on this topic. So Terry, I'm going to hand off to you.
Yeah, so this could be a really challenging thing if you've got a lot of people that are not able to handle conflict on your teams, if people are not able to get along well, if they're struggling to communicate. It can really wreak havoc on deliverables if you can't get people to talk to each other. I've served in that role of communicating or facilitating communication many times, just in multiple roles that I've had throughout my career. And it's always been very interesting to me how people will just kind of take their stance about something and they dig their heels in and they don't want to hear.
Boy, don't they?
They don't want to hear anything else. Like it's completely impossible, almost anyway, to get them to see it a different way. And so if you can hone that skill set of getting people to stay in that calm mode where they can actually communicate like adults, they're not speaking to each other like kids or talking down to each other. If you can get people to stay in that mindset where they're not trying to survive the conversation or get out of it as quickly as possible, but they're actually in a state of mind where they can learn something about themselves and the other person, it really does change the dynamic on the team when you get out of your own head about it. And so I want to share this picture because I think it really shows exactly what the most important thing that you can do during any kind of communication with people. And that's this one big thing. So you've got this guy speaking on this side, but the guy that's on this side is doing something that's very important, and that's listening.
I love the big ear.
Yeah,
I love it. I mean, that's really how big it should be. It's that important.
It's so super important that you are actually listening to the other person. When the conflict arises, you really do need to listen to the other person. Make sure that you're not just waiting for your turn to speak, that you're in your mind building up your case of why everything they just said is wrong, but that take time to actually listen to what they're saying and then process it. Try to get in the other person's shoes, try to see it from their perspective, how they might have received what you were saying. Don't just think about it from your side and automatically assume the other person is wrong. Like no matter what happens in every conflict, the other person is wrong. If you stay in that state of mind, you'll never actually grow and evolve from conflict, because conflict can actually help you grow. Conflict is actually a good thing. Conflict shows where there are gaps. And if you never know where the gaps are, you never have an opportunity to fill the gap. You never have an opportunity to grow and evolve into a better person after having gone through that conflict. This is especially true in marriage relationships. And we're talking about the workplace, but this is This is very true in all kinds of relationships
in
where
life.
you can actually grow from that conflict. You get to learn something about the other person and you learn something about yourself in the process. But you've got to be willing to, I'll call it enduring the pain of the conflict. So you have to be willing to stay in that space that's uncomfortable. You don't really like it. Nobody likes being in that
No,
place.
you got to be vulnerable enough to get some feedback too.
Yeah,
You got to be open-minded and realize that, maybe in fact you're not right.
right,
Maybe the other person's point of view is correct. And
right.
that's why, companies that really train people in how to have good conversations, how to deal with conflict, leaders that get out in front of this and create an environment where there are certain rules for engagement, where people are supposed to build trusting relationships, where you don't talk over one another, where if you do something to offend somebody, you're required to apologize and do that relationship repair and mending on your own. Because as an organization, relationships are really the source of productivity. This is how work gets done. And this is why, workplace conflict affects productivity so much because it
Yeah,
damages the primary means that work is getting done, which is relationships or problem solving and thinking, because the limbic system gets stimulated in a conflict and that starts to shut down really 60 to 70% of your real thinking ability because you start focusing on the threat.
yeah,
So these are real issues. And, good leaders get out in front of this.
yeah.
They're working on building relationships all the time and strengthening them, putting in norms for behavior that people are expected to follow to prevent the breakdown in relationships or the inability for two people to actually repair them.
Yeah. And the other layer that comes with being a remote worker is if you don't have your camera on and you're in meetings or you're sending emails, nobody can really get the tone from your email. It's difficult, I'll say it that way, for people to get clues from you that they would have normally gotten if they saw your body language. So you can see people's facial expressions and gauge what they're really thinking and
Very
feeling.
important.
And that goes away in the virtual environment. So you have to be really intentional about that because sometimes people can misunderstand or take something that you say in an email the wrong way because they don't know you or they can't see your body language. They can't see the tone that you're writing with in the email unless they really know you. And so you have to be even more considerate of the fact when you're sending emails. Sometimes it's just best, especially if it's a conflict email, sometimes it's best to just wait a minute, like breathe. I've
Oh
done this
God,
before.
don't write it and send it. Send it the
Yeah,
next day. Go
write it,
reread it, calm down.
leave it,
It'll be
write it.
better. It'll be better when you go back and edit it. There's no
Yeah,
question.
because you'll give yourself a chance to calm down, especially if you've been offended or you feel like the other person is not treating you fairly. In those kinds of situations, you need to give yourself some space to calm down and to rethink. And so take some time, write it out how you're feeling it. Sometimes it's therapeutic to just say it how you would want to say it if you were to say it.
Yeah.
So just say it. And then you always come back and you reword it and you soften it up and you add some more positives in there. But it's good to just get it out sometimes, but you don't want to get it out and share it because that can be dangerous. That can actually be detrimental to your career because you get labeled. And once you get labeled as a difficult person to deal with, that presentation that I shared from, I called people the cactus in your life. You don't want to be labeled a cactus. You
Yeah.
don't want to be that prickly person that everybody has to handle very carefully because otherwise there's going to be an explosion. You don't want to be that person.
Oh
You want to
no.
make sure that you're able to be empathetic and get in somebody else's shoes and see things from their perspective. Have a high level of emotional intelligence and self awareness so that you're able to make some great contributions to your team.
Yeah, I love the image of a cactus because there are, prickly people like that. You don't want to get too near them. And there are a lot of personality types. You might want to watch a show on people unproductive. We did like 14 different personality types. and individuals that tend to lower productivity on the workplace. It's on our YouTube channel. I think it was a great series. But there are these prickly people around, and they sometimes are very important. A good skill that every leader should develop is relationship repair. How do you go about repairing a relationship that's damaged, yet the people working together is very important to the success of what you have to get done. And you should work on that. You should have ground rules for when they get together. They have to always say I. They can't talk about the other person. No hearsay. And you've got to actually make sure they both think that the relationship is worth salvaging, because that mindset is really the most important in terms of getting them to move towards a better working relationship and having them clear the air, working with them to clear the air. It may be, if you're the boss, maybe somebody who is completely unbiased and not involved could come in and help you out. I've done some of that work over time, but sometimes relationships do need to be repaired. You've got to have some third party come in and help when those relationships really matter. And most importantly, like I said earlier, leaders have to get out in front of this. You should be working to make sure that relationships don't fray to that point, that you're observant, that you're looking out for this, that you intervene early as possible if you see a relationship starting to head south before a lot of damage is done. That's the best time to solve the problem. But if you have a set of norms that really talk about candor and being inclusive and listening well, that big ear, giving people space to be heard, very important. Also, making sure everybody in the organization knows that when there is a one-on-one, that is a time to bring up things regarding relationships that may need some help or assistance. And you should always be inquiring, are there any relationship issues where it's beginning to affect your productivity? You should know, as the leader of the organization, what's going on and try to do the relationship repair work one way or another. I think it's very important.
It is very important. And you also want to make sure you're using the right words, but not too many.
Yeah.
So there's a delicate balance there. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes not using, not saying everything is probably the best approach. Sometimes you need to say more things. So there's a balancing act to that. You really do have to find that sweet spot of communication. But when people are heated and you're trying to have a conversation with somebody that is in a hothead state, then it's going to be difficult. So you've got to find a way to diffuse the situation and calm things down. And you do that through words sometimes. And so you want to make sure that you're choosing your words carefully. You don't want to throw more fuel on the fire. You want to make sure that you're actually calming the situation down and not escalating it further. But using the right words can actually bring a heated situation down. A heated conversation can calm when you begin to focus in on those, what it is that you're feeling. So not just or assuming that the person had ill intent by what they did or what they said.
That's
Focus
very important.
on how it made you feel, and not the blame game. So you want to stay away from words that trigger blame or that imply that the other person had ill intent. Those words are going to add more fuel, and they're not going to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah. And, the go-to assumption is the person had ill intent. They were doing it on purpose. They're going after me. And that is almost never the case. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, right? We see real personality clashes where somebody wants to undermine somebody else and they send the torpedoes out. It happens. We've all seen it. But a lot of these personality conflicts are misunderstandings. They just don't know the other person. They can't appreciate their perspective. And so, yeah, it really does matter to be open-minded, to think about the other person's situation, to be willing to have a conversation. And don't go running after the meeting and send that flame email, like Terry said. Give it a day to cool down, actually be the adult in the situation, maybe reach out to the person and say, I think, our relationship frayed a little yesterday. I'd love to chat and see if we can put this behind us, because, you're important to the team and I want to be able to work well with you. Be the first one to reach out.
Yeah, I think Frank mentioned this earlier, but it is such a great point about just establishing what the goals are for this conversation. So we had a conflict, but I want to salvage the relationship. I don't want it to be a conflict and hostile type relationship. I want us to be able to work together. And that's so important to set that intention right out the gate, because then it helps the other person see, oh, she really wasn't trying to attack me, or she's really trying to repair the relationship. And they're not just kind of with that storyline. Everybody has that storyline that they play out in their own head when conflict arises. And
Yeah.
you kind of make your own assumptions, and you're looking for cues to show you, yes, you're right. And so you want to right out the gate state exactly what you're trying to accomplish. What is the purpose of this conversation? I'm trying to save the relationship. I don't want us to have conflict. That means a lot to people. That will diffuse a situation where the other person may have automatically assumed that you were trying to destroy the relationship. Most of the time, like Frank said, it's not that. People aren't really just trying to destroy relationships. They just are angry or frustrated, or they feel offended. And so they're defending themselves, as opposed to staying in a state of mind where they're able to calmly think about things and are even able to get in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah, I mean, sources of conflict have been studied in organizations, and although in some cases it's personality conflicts, I mean, there are other situations. People disagree over how to do the work. Somebody didn't follow a process, procedure, and the person didn't handle that properly. So there's a lot of reasons that conflicts emerge. The most important thing is to really get out in front of them. I think, to summarize, as a leader, you want to make sure that you are helping avoid conflicts. You're repairing relationships where it's necessary. Conflict is highly destructive to productivity. People have to work together. They've got to be able to, accept one another for who they are, and they've got to be able to collaborate to make a difference in the organization. All of this stuff is really important, and you should always be on the lookout for situations where relationships are fraying. Go back and watch that episode on how relationships drive productivity. It is so important. I could never find a study on how much conflict actually impacted productivity. We know there's many, many impacts it has, but does conflict in organizations drain away 40% of the productivity, 30? I don't know, but it could be very, very significant. So we have a broadcast every Wednesday at 3:00. I hope you can join us. You can watch it anytime. We're on the YouTube channel, on our LinkedIn channel, on LinkedIn. You go to People Productive there. All the episodes are there. So feel free to join us. We're here every week with another episode on the human factors that affect productivity in the workplace. So, really thank you for coming, and see you next week.
Yes. Bye for now.